Picture New York City in winter. Snow just barely, dusting the edges of fire escapes and settling on the shoulders of strangers who don't look up. The streets are lit orange and yellow by the glow of corner shops and taxi headlights. It's cold enough that breath turns to mist and quiet enough that you can hear the city settling into itself. And there, swinging between buildings in a suit that is clearly, very obviously, homemade, is Spider-Man. No Stark tech, no AI companion, no best friend with a headset feeding him information. No aunt waiting up, no girlfriend texting to ask when he's coming home. Just him, and the city, and the wind, and the particular kind of silence that lives inside total solitude. This is where we find Peter Parker at the end of No Way Home. And honestly, if you sit with that image for a moment, really sit with it, it hits quite differently than most superhero endings. There's no triumphant score. There's no reunion. There's just a boy in a homemade suit, completely alone in a city of 8 million people, none of whom know his name. Welcome, by the way. Settle in. Get comfortable. This is going to be a long, slow drift through some of the most interesting theories surrounding what comes next for Peter Parker, what the Marvel fandom has come to call, borrowing from the comics, his brand new day. There's no rush here. We're not racing toward a conclusion. We're just going to wander through the possibilities together at a pace that feels more like thinking than talking. So, brand new day. The phrase itself comes from the comics, specifically from a 2008 Spider-Man arc that followed what is arguably the most controversial story in the character's history, One More Day. The short version of that story is this: Aunt May is dying. A deal is offered by a devil-adjacent figure called Mephisto. The deal? Save May's life, at the cost of Peter's marriage to Mary Jane Watson. The deal is taken. The marriage is erased from reality. Peter wakes up single, with his history and memories rewritten so that he and Mary Jane were never married, and the world no longer remembers his unmasked identity. And then the next arc begins, titled, you guessed it, Brand New Day. The idea was a reset, a fresh start, a return to a Peter Parker who was unencumbered by years of continuity, free to be the young, struggling, brilliant, perpetually put upon Spider-Man that the character was always meant to be. Now, the EMCU didn't use that name. The MCU didn't make a deal with the devil, but the shape of what happened at the end of No Way Home is emotionally and structurally the same thing. Doctor Strange cast a spell so complete, so total, that everyone on Earth, everyone in the universe really, forgot that Peter Parker exists, not just that he's Spider-Man, that he exists at all. The spell erased people's memories of Peter Parker, no school memories. There are still photographs of Peter Parker in people's phones, but the spell obscures his face or makes them overlook him. Just gone. A person-shaped hole in the world, walking around in a handmade suit, keeping the city safe for people who will never be able to thank him by name. That is a brand new day. And what we're going to do tonight, or this evening, or this very early morning, wherever you are and whatever time is quietly happening around you, is explore what that means. Where Peter goes from here. What the theorists and the fans and the close readers of Marvel lore have pieced together from clues from the comics, from the edges of the films themselves. We'll wander through questions about MJ, about Ned, about the villains who might come next and the allies Peter doesn't know he's going to need. We'll spend some time with the comics, because they have a lot to say, and we'll end somewhere quiet, somewhere reflective, somewhere that hopefully feels like a natural place to let go of the day. No urgency, no tension, just theories told slowly in the dark. Let's begin. Before we get into the theories themselves, before we talk about MJ, about Ned, about villains and symbiotes and all the rest of it, it's worth spending a bit of time on the spell itself. Because the more you examine what Doctor Strange actually did at the end of No Way Home, the more interesting and genuinely strange it becomes. And I mean that in the best possible way. The original request, if you remember, was fairly targeted. Peter asks Strange to make everyone forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. That was the ask, a specific, surgical piece of memory removal. The problem was that Peter, being Peter, kept interrupting the spell as it was being cast. He wanted MJ to remember. Then Ned. Then May. Then Happy. Then presumably everyone he'd ever spoken to, which rather defeats the purpose. And the spell, unable to handle this constant stream of exceptions, fractured. It cracked open the multiverse, pulled in 5 villains from other realities, and eventually had to be resolved in the most extreme way possible, by making everyone forget that Peter Parker exists at all. Not just the Spider-Man secret, not just the heroics, the whole person. So what does it actually mean for a memory spell of this scale to work? The EMCU has shown us that magic can alter memories. Wanda did it to an entire town in WandaVision, and Strange has demonstrated memory manipulation in various forms. But what's unique about this particular spell is its scope. It didn't just affect minds. The film implies, and this is important, that it affected records too. School files, medical records, social media histories, photographs. Peter Parker's entire documentary existence was apparently scrubbed. Which raises a rather wonderful question. What about the systems that aren't strictly human? Think about Nick Fury, for instance. Fury spent a significant portion of the post-Endgame period off-planet, running a SHIELD-adjacent intelligence operation from a space station called Sabre. His records weren't stored on a school server in Queens. They were stored in something far more secure, far more distributed, and potentially far less susceptible to a terrestrial magic spell cast over New York City. Theory 1 then. Fury still has a file on Peter Parker somewhere. Not complete, possibly not connected to Spider-Man, but a fragment. A name that appears in proximity to Tony Stark. In the AMCU, Peter Parker travelled to Berlin with Happy Hogan during the events of Captain America, Civil War, and appeared in combat footage. Fury is good at finding threads. He doesn't need the full memory to start pulling. Then there's the question of the Avengers themselves. Tony Stark is dead. That's fixed. But the people Tony worked with, Sam Wilson, who is now Captain America, Thor, Bruce Banner, Rhodey, Happy Hogan, all of them knew Peter. All of them presumably forgot him. And yet, here's a thought that I find genuinely compelling. Does Doctor Strange remember casting the spell? Strange is the one who performed the magic. He chose to do it. He stood there and watched the spell ripple out across the universe. The question of whether the caster retains any memory of a spell they themselves cast is never addressed in the film. But it's not unreasonable to think that Strange, who's always been meticulous about knowing the consequences of his own actions, retained at least some knowledge of what he did. If that's the case, if Strange knows a spell was cast, knows roughly what it erased, even if he can't specifically remember Peter, then Strange is in a uniquely strange position. He's a man who knows he made someone disappear, but can't quite remember who. And the interesting follow-on from that, Strange knows Spider-Man exists. He's seen Spider-Man. He worked alongside Spider-Man on Titan against Thanos. What he doesn't know, post-spell, is who Spider-Man is, which means that for the first time in the EMCU, Peter Parker has a genuinely complete secret identity, not just from the public, but from the most powerful magical practitioner on the planet. That's quite the upgrade. The spell affects memory though, it doesn't affect experience. This is a distinction that matters quite a lot for the theories ahead. If you've forgotten someone exists, you've lost the cognitive record of them, the narrative of who they were to you, but you haven't lost the emotional imprinting that happens through close relationships. The neural patterns that form through love and friendship don't simply delete when a memory does. Neuroscience, as it happens, supports this. There's a phenomenon called state-dependent memory, where emotional or physical states can trigger recall of experiences that were otherwise inaccessible. The smell of someone's perfume, a familiar gesture, a particular kind of laugh. These sensory anchors can sometimes help bring back fragments of memories that were thought lost, even in certain clinical amnesia cases. The spell isn't clinical amnesia, it's magic, but the EMCU has generally treated magic as operating on similar principles to reality, just with expanded parameters. So the question of whether MJ or Ned or Happy might experience a flicker of something familiar upon encountering Peter, a sense that they should know this person, that something about his presence is unreasonably comfortable, feels like a legitimate space to explore. We will explore it. Quite at length, actually. One more element worth thinking through: the permanence of the spell. Nothing in the NMCU has ever established that a spell of this magnitude cannot be undone. In fact, the history of MCU magic is largely a history of things being reversed. Strange manipulated time with the Eye of Agamotto in his first film, rewinding Caecilius's destruction of the Hong Kong sanctum. Thanos rewound Vision's death once, actually. Magic in this universe has a distinctly provisional quality. It's powerful, yes, but it's not generally final, which introduces a theory that's quite popular in certain corners of the fandom. The spell can be reversed, and one day, in some future film, at some point in Peter's story, someone will ask Strange to undo it, to give Peter his life back. The theory doesn't stop there, though. It asks, what if Strange refuses? Strange is not a man who undoes things carelessly. He spent his career learning that tampering with time and memory creates consequences that ripple in unpredictable directions. He broke the multiverse once, and he wasn't even the one making the mistakes. The idea of reversing a spell that completely rewrote global memory on the request of a teenager who just wants his girlfriend back seems like something Strange would push back on very firmly. And that tension between what Peter needs emotionally and what Strange knows magically could be one of the most interesting conflicts in whatever comes next. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let's just sit with the spell as it is. Total. Complete. A young man perfectly erased, and a city that will never know what it owes him. Right, let's talk about MJ. If there is one thread in the entire Brand New Day theory space that people return to, obsessively, repeatedly, from every possible angle, it's Michelle Jones, the girl in the coffee shop. The girl who doesn't look up when Peter Parker walks through the door. The girl who, in another timeline, fell for a boy who kept disappearing at inconvenient moments and made a rather poor job of hiding why, and loved him anyway. She doesn't know any of that now, and the question of whether she ever will is, honestly, one of the most emotionally loaded open questions in the entire EMCU. Let's start with the scene itself, the very last scene of No Way Home, before Peter swings away into the snow. He goes to the coffee shop. He walks in one of the final scenes of Spider-Man, No Way Home. Peter Parker sees MJ behind the counter, and you can see it on his face. He recognizes everything about her, and she recognizes nothing about him. He almost speaks. He gets close enough to the counter that the moment is right there, available, waiting, and then he stops. He steps back. He decides quietly and without fanfare that the kindest thing he can do for her is nothing. That the safest version of MJ's life is one in which Peter Parker doesn't exist in it. He leaves, and the camera holds on her face for just a moment, and there's nothing there. Not recognition, not a flicker, nothing. It is one of the most quietly devastating endings in Marvel's entire catalogue, and I say that as someone who sat through the first 20 minutes of Infinity War, which were not exactly a gentle ride. The first theory, and the most hopeful, is sometimes called the déjà vu theory. The idea behind it is this: the spell erased conscious memory. It did not erase emotional memory. We touched on this in the previous section, the distinction between the cognitive record of a relationship and the emotional imprinting that forms through it. The short version, love and closeness leave a shape in the nervous system that doesn't simply delete when the facts do. The theory suggests that MJ, upon crossing paths with Peter again, would feel something along those lines. Not "I remember you," but something harder to name, a sense of safety, an instinctive ease, the kind of inexplicable comfort that makes you want to keep a conversation going with a stranger without knowing why. This isn't the stuff of dramatic revelation, it's subtler than that. And for a sleep content audience, lying in the dark thinking about these things, that subtlety is actually quite beautiful. The idea that love doesn't fully delete, that it leaves a shape in the space it used to occupy, is the kind of theory that asks something genuine of you. The MCU has gestured at this kind of thing before. In WandaVision, the residents of Westview retained emotional trauma from their experience even after Wanda's spell was lifted. In Loki, Mobius forgot his entire life before the TVA, but retained certain preferences, certain instincts that were unmistakably his own. Memory and identity are not the same thing in the AMCU. They can be separated, and what remains after the separation is often more essential than what was taken. This one is smaller and more specific, and I'm rather fond of it. During the climax of No Way Home, there's a moment where MJ falls from the scaffolding on the Statue of Liberty. She's caught, saved, but not before taking an impact that would reasonably leave some kind of physical mark. A bruised rib, a lasting ache in her shoulder, a scar somewhere. Physical scars carry sensory memory in ways that are distinct from the cognitive kind. A scar you can touch is a record of something that happened to your body, even if your mind has been edited around it. When you press on it and it aches, the body is saying, something happened here. I don't know what, but something happened. The theory, MJ has a mark somewhere from that night, and there will be a moment, probably quiet, probably ordinary, where she presses on it, or notices it, or wonders for the 100th time how she got it, and the wondering will take her closer to a memory the spell was supposed to erase. It's a Proustian theory, really. Memory returning not through the mind but through the body, through sensation rather than thought. Whether the MCU would use something that's subtle is debatable, but I think it would be rather wonderful if they did. This is the most narratively direct theory, and the one that requires the least magical infrastructure to work. Some fans believe, and there's a reasonably good argument for this, that Peter will eventually decide the solitude is unsustainable. That being a hero who protects a city he has no one to share with is over time a kind of slow erosion. Not a crisis, not a breakdown, just a quiet diminishing. And that one day he'll walk back into that coffee shop and say hello. Not to reclaim the relationship. That would be unfair to her. You cannot resume a love story when one person has lost all the chapters that came before. But to begin something new. A fresh introduction. A stranger who happens to feel oddly comfortable. A friendship that starts from zero and perhaps, over a long time, becomes something again. The tragedy in this version, and it is a genuine tragedy, is that Peter would always know what they had. He would remember every conversation, every inside joke, every moment of quiet between them, and she would be experiencing it all for the first time. He would be falling in love with her again, while she was only just beginning to fall. That asymmetry is not nothing. It would weigh on every scene, and the MCU, at its best, is very good at that kind of structural sadness. Theory 4. She never remembers. And that's the point. I want to spend a bit of time with the bleakest theory, because I think it might actually be the most honest one. The spell was permanent. Strange designed it to be permanent, or at least, Strange designed the corrected version to be as complete and thorough as possible, because the stakes were the stability of the entire multiverse. This was not a light casting. This was the nuclear option of memory magic. There's no particular reason to believe it comes with a built-in reversal mechanism. There's no reason to assume MJ's emotional memory will be enough to break through something that rewrote her perception of reality at a fundamental level. And if we're being honest with ourselves, if we're trying to think about what good storytelling would actually do with this material, the answer might be that MJ never remembers. Not because the writers couldn't find a way to reverse the spell, but because reversing it would undermine the sacrifice Peter made. The whole point of the ending, the reason it hit so hard, the reason people were openly crying in cinemas, is that Peter's choice was real. Not a temporary setback, not a wait for the sequel to fix it, a genuine, permanent loss that he accepted to save the people he loved, and a multiverse full of strangers. If the next film walks that back, or if MJ remembers within 20 minutes of screen time, then the sacrifice wasn't actually a sacrifice. It was a plot device. The most respectable version of Brand New Day, in my opinion, is one where MJ lives her life, where she grows and changes and becomes someone brilliant and sharp and fully herself, and never knows about the boy who loved her enough to become a ghost for her safety. And Peter watches that, from a distance, for as long as it takes, because that's what he chose, not because someone forced him, because he chose it. That's Spider-Man. That's always been Spider-Man. It's worth knowing, because the comics have thoughts about this and they're relevant, that in the original Brand New Day arc, Mary Jane Watson actually did know the truth. She was one of very few people whose memory of Peter's deal with Mephisto wasn't fully erased. She carried it quietly, and for a long time she and Peter maintained a distance, a careful separation, that was built on the weight of something she knew, and he didn't. The MC, you could do something with that. The spell affected everyone. But what if MJ, over time, started having dreams she couldn't explain? Not memories, just shapes. The specific angle of a particular laugh, the feel of a hand she can't place, the ghost of a life she never technically lived. That version of MJ, someone haunted by an absence she can't name, would be extraordinary to watch. And it would mean that even in the theory, where she never consciously remembers, she's still carrying something of what they had, which, honestly, is probably the most human thing this story could do with her. Ned leads. Honestly, Ned might be the most interesting loose thread in the entire post-No Way Home landscape, and he doesn't get nearly enough attention in these conversations. Everyone wants to talk about MJ, which fair, we just did, and about the villains that are coming. But Ned is sitting in the middle of this story with a collection of genuinely extraordinary unanswered questions attached to him, and I think he deserves a proper look. Let's start with what we know. By the end of No Way Home, Ned Leeds is heading to MIT. He has an acceptance letter. He has ambitions. He is, by any measure, a young man with a bright and seemingly conventional future ahead of him. He also no longer remembers his best friend. He no longer remembers the years of late nights spent as the guy in the chair, feeding Peter information through a headset while Peter swung through Queens and fought people on ferries. He doesn't know he was ever part of anything like that. From his perspective, he's just a smart kid who got into a good school, and somewhere in his possession, or at least somewhere it hasn't been confirmed was taken away, is a sling ring that belongs to Doctor Strange. During the chaos of the final act of No Way Home, Ned gets hold of Strange's sling ring, and he uses it, immediately, instinctively, without any training. He opens portals to other universes as though the ring is simply responding to something in him. That is not normal. Doctor Strange is not the Sorcerer Supreme in the MCU. Wong is. He trained for years at Kamar-Taj before he could reliably use a sling ring. The Ancient One spent centuries developing her abilities. Sorcery in the MCU is not something that just works for people because they're enthusiastic about it. There is an implication, fairly strong I think, that Ned has some innate magical aptitude, something that allows him to channel the ring's power without having done the work to earn that ability. Wong notices things like this. That's his job essentially, identifying magical talent and potential threats to the sanctums. If he hasn't already noticed Ned, he probably will. Theory, Ned gets a visit. Not dramatic, not violent, just a very calm, slightly intimidating conversation with Wong, who would like to know more about this teenager who opened portals to other universes using a ring he definitely should not have been able to operate. And from that conversation, something begins. A tutelage, perhaps, or simply an awareness. Ned learning that he has a capacity for something he doesn't have a name for yet. That version of Ned, a Ned who starts quietly becoming something more, is a fascinating parallel to Peter's journey. Both were ordinary teenagers who got pulled into extraordinary circumstances. Both have abilities that arrived without instruction or preparation. But where Peter's gifts were physical, Ned's appear to be something else entirely. Now we arrive at the theory that makes the comics readers in the audience sit up slightly. In the source material, Ned Leeds eventually becomes the Hobgoblin. Not voluntarily, he is brainwashed and manipulated by the actual Hobgoblin, Roderick Kingsley, into acting as a decoy. Ned believes himself to be the real Hobgoblin. He commits crimes under that identity. He becomes a villain while being, in his own understanding, a hero, or at least a soldier in someone else's cause. He eventually dies for it. It is one of the most quietly tragic arcs in Spider-Man's publishing history, because Ned was Peter's best friend, the person who knew him most completely, and the story of his fall is one that happens largely off-screen, through manipulation and psychological dismantling, until the person who comes out the other side, wearing the Hobgoblin mask, barely resembles the Ned that Peter knew. The MCU setup is already there, not immediately, not in the next film, but the scaffolding exists. Consider, Ned now has magical ability, no memory of his connection to Peter, and a future that puts him in proximity to institutions and power structures that a villain could absolutely exploit. If someone wanted to get to Spider-Man, and there will always be someone who wants to get to Spider-Man, recruiting Ned as an unwitting weapon would be a spectacularly cruel way to do it, particularly because Ned would have no idea that Spider-Man was once his best friend. There's no loyalty to override, no friendship to make him hesitate. The tragedy of the EMCU Hobgoblin arc, if it happens, is that it would be even more devastating than the comics version. Because in the comics, Ned at least had the history with Peter to make his corruption a betrayal. In the EMCU version, it would be a betrayal that Ned himself never even knew was possible. Peter would know. The audience would know. Ned never would. I want to balance the Hobgoblin theory with its opposite, because not everything needs to end in tragedy, and I think it's worth considering the possibility that Ned's arc goes somewhere different. There's a version of this story where Ned, through his magical ability and his MIT education, becomes one of the most genuinely useful people in the EMCU's magical ecosystem, someone who sits at the intersection of technology and sorcery, someone who works with Wong or alongside Strange or even independently, a practitioner who doesn't wear robes and doesn't live at Kamartaj, but can open a portal when one is needed and knows enough about the mechanics of the multiverse to be genuinely helpful. And in this version, Ned and Peter find their way back to each other. Not because Ned remembers, the spell saw to that, but because their paths simply cross. Because two people with complementary abilities who are shaped by the same extraordinary events will eventually end up in the same rooms. And because whatever made them friends the first time, the wavelength they were on, the particular rhythm of their dynamic is the kind of thing that survives memory loss. You don't need to remember someone to recognize them. Not really. That version of Ned is perhaps less dramatically interesting than the Hobgoblin theory. It doesn't have the gut punch, but it has a different kind of weight. The weight of things that persist without explanation, of bonds that reform without knowing why. I'm fond of both theories. I hold them in equal esteem. They're both asking, in their different ways, the same question. What happens to a friendship when you take the memory away? Do the people find each other again, or do the paths simply never cross a second time? One final thought on Ned before we move on. The sling ring was never retrieved. As far as we know, it's still with Ned, and a sling ring that can open portals to other universes in the hands of someone with innate magical ability who doesn't know how to control it is arguably one of the most dangerous objects in the MCU. Not because Ned is dangerous, he's not. He's Ned. He's thoughtful and kind and absolutely the sort of person who would feel bad about accidentally opening a portal to a dimension full of something terrible. But accidents happen, and magic in the MCU has a consistent habit of responding to emotional states. Fear, grief, desperation, all of these have triggered magical events in characters who weren't fully in control of their abilities. Wanda is the obvious example, but she's not the only one. If Ned, at some point in the future, is in a situation of genuine emotional extremity, grief, fear, something that breaks through his ordinary calm, and he still has that ring, something could happen. Something unpredictable. Something, potentially, that reopens a door between worlds that Strange worked very hard to close. That's the theory that keeps me most interested in Ned Leeds as a character. Not the Hobgoblin arc, not the magical apprentice arc, but the idea that Ned completely, accidentally, without intent or malice, might be the person who changes things again. Just by feeling too much at the wrong moment with a ring in his pocket. There's a scene early in No Way Home that most people remember because it's funny. Peter Parker is standing in his apartment and a brick comes flying through the window, thrown by someone outside who is not pleased with him. And Matt Murdock, blind lawyer, calmly present in the room, reaches out and catches it, without looking, without flinching, with the easy, reflexive precision of someone whose relationship with the physical world is considerably more intimate than it appears. The joke lands because the audience knows who Matt Murdock is. Everyone in the theatre who had watched the Netflix Daredevil series, and there are many of them, immediately understood what that catch meant. And the delight of the scene is in the gap between what the other characters see, a surprisingly fast blind man, and what the audience knows, a highly trained vigilante who can hear a brick travelling through the air at 40 miles an hour and intercept it without breaking his composure. But beyond the laugh, that scene does something important. It establishes that Matt Murdock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He's operating as Peter's lawyer. He has legal access to information about Peter's case. He is, at that moment, probably one of the most informed non-Avenger adults in Peter's orbit. And then the spell happens, and all of that goes away. Or does it? Let's think about this carefully. The spell erased the memory of Peter Parker's existence from everyone's mind. Murdock would have lost his recollection of taking Peter on as a client. He would have lost the memory of the apartment visit, the conversation, the brick, all of it. From a cognitive standpoint, the case simply would not exist in his memory. The files would be gone. The billable hours mysteriously absent from his records. But here's the thing about Matt Murdock that makes his situation genuinely unique among everyone in Peter's former life. His senses operate independently of his memory. Murdock doesn't remember Peter, but if Murdock encounters Spider-Man, if they're in the same space, if Murdock is within earshot or within the range of his radar sense, his body will register something. The particular rhythm of Spider-Man's heartbeat, the acoustic signature of webbing being released, the specific weight and speed of movement that belongs to someone with superhuman agility and reflexes. Murdock has encountered Spider-Man before. His body catalogued that encounter, the way his body catalogues everything, automatically, without his conscious instruction. And that catalogue doesn't delete when memories do. Theory, the first time Daredevil and Spider-Man meet in the post-Brand New Day MCU, Murdock will know, on some level he can't articulate, that he has encountered this person before. Not a specific memory, not a name, but a recognition. The way you might recognize a piece of music you can't name, or a smell that takes you somewhere you can't locate. He won't know what it means, but he'll know it means something. Peter Parker, in his Brand New Day life, is operating at street level. He's in a homemade suit, without resources, without institutional support, swinging through a city that doesn't know his name. He is, for possibly the first time in his MCU existence, working in the same register as Matt Murdock. These two have always been natural counterparts in the comics. Spider-Man and Daredevil share New York, the way two neighbours might share a building. They fight in the same streets. They care about the same kinds of people. They both have a complicated relationship with their Catholic guilt, though Peter is only loosely coded as Catholic, while Matt is absolutely, unmistakably, specifically Catholic in ways that inform every decision he makes. The theory here is clean and feels almost inevitable. Peter and Matt find each other. Not because of the spell, not because of any grand multiversal event, but simply because they are both people who protect New York at night. And New York is not that big once you're crawling on the walls of it. They fight together. They argue about methods. Daredevil is comfortable with a level of physical intimidation that Peter generally isn't. And Peter's webbing tends to complicate anyone else's combat choreography, but they find a rhythm. And over time, without Murdoch knowing why, he trusts this Spider-Man in a way that goes beyond what the evidence of their acquaintance would justify. Because on some level, he already knows him. If you've been watching the Daredevil content that's been threading through the EMCU, specifically Hawkeye and Echo, you'll know that Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, is very much alive and operational. He survived being shot at close range, which suggests either considerable physical resilience, considerable luck, or both. He is rebuilding his power base. He has political ambitions. He is, in short, exactly the kind of villain who belongs in a street-level brand new day story. Here's the connective tissue. Fisk runs organised crime in New York. A New York Peter Parker is trying to protect without the resources or institutional backing that used to make that possible. And Daredevil has been fighting Fisk's operation for years, largely unsuccessfully, because Fisk is clever and patient and operates at a scale that a man in a red suit fundamentally struggles to counter on his own. Add Spider-Man, young, impulsive, extraordinarily capable, but working entirely off the grid, to that equation, and you have the ingredients for a genuinely interesting street-level story. One where the villain isn't trying to end the world, just trying to own a city, which is in some ways more frightening. Theory: Spider-Man 4 uses Fisk as a background power. Not the final villain, not a supervillain in the traditional sense, just the weight that everything else has to move around. The man who, without ever putting on a costume, makes Peter's brand new day life measurably harder. There's a storyline in the comics called Born Again. It's a Daredevil story, written by Frank Miller, where Fisk systematically destroys Matt Murdock's life after learning his secret identity. Not through dramatic violence, through attrition, through corruption of every institution Murdock relies on. His law license, his relationships, his landlord, his bank. Piece by piece, the scaffolding of a life gets dismantled until Murdock has nothing left but the suit and the will to keep going. It's one of the greatest superhero stories ever written, and the MCU has been slowly, carefully laying the groundwork for something adjacent to it. Now flip the lens. Imagine that story happening not to Daredevil, but to Spider-Man. Imagine Fisk, who has resources, patience, and a particular appetite for destroying people methodically, deciding that this new Spider-Man is a problem worth addressing. Not with a superpowered fight, but with attrition, with the slow removal of the small things Peter has managed to build in his brand new day life. It would hit differently than a monster of the week villain, because the threat wouldn't be to Peter's life, it would be to Peter's ability to have one. And Matt Murdock, who has been through exactly this kind of destruction before, would be the person best equipped to tell him how to survive it. That partnership, that parallel, is the version of Spider-Man 4 I find myself most interested in when I think about it late at night. There is a post-credits scene at the end of Spider-Man, Homecoming, that the EMCU has never paid off. 7 years have passed. It remains, in the most literal sense, unfinished business. The scene is this. Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, is in prison. He's sharing a prison corridor with a tattooed, unfriendly-looking man named Matt Gargan. Gargan tells Toomes that there are people on the outside who want Spider-Man dead, and asks Toomes if he knows who Spider-Man is. Toomes, who absolutely does know, he worked it out in the film, quite cleverly, looks Gargan dead in the eyes and says he doesn't. The reasons for Toomes' silence there are debated. The most generous reading is that Toomes, having interacted with Peter and having seen what Peter is capable of, retains some residual respect for him. Maybe even a fractured version of gratitude. Peter saved his life, after all, even after everything. So Toomes protects the secret. But Gargan leaves that scene with a promise. There are people who want Spider-Man dead, and Mac Gargan, we're meant to understand, is the kind of person who eventually delivers on those promises. Here's the interesting wrinkle. At the time of the Homecoming post-credits scene, Gargan knew who Spider-Man was, or at least he was trying to find out. He did not know the name Peter Parker. He knew enough to be pursuing the question. Then the spell happened, and Peter Parker ceased to exist in anyone's memory. So what does Gargan know now? Technically, nothing. The memory of that name, that face, that connection is gone. He's a man with a grudge against a superhero who has no idea where that grudge came from. But the grudge is still there. The desire to hurt Spider-Man, not Peter Parker specifically, just the person in the suit, doesn't require knowledge of the person's identity. Gargan doesn't need to know who Peter is to want to kill him. He just needs to find him. And Spider-Man, operating at street level without institutional support, is considerably more findable than he used to be. In the comics, Mac Gargan becomes the Scorpion. The transformation is funded originally by J. Jonah Jameson, Jameson wanting a weapon capable of defeating Spider-Man and being willing to fund the research. Gargan volunteers for experimental procedures that graft a powered exoskeleton, the Scorpion suit, to his body and enhance his physical capabilities significantly. The EMCU equivalent almost writes itself. The Vulture's technology has been floating around in various forms since Homecoming, weapons built from salvaged alien tech, distributed through criminal networks. Some of that tech was confiscated, some, inevitably, wasn't. And the Scorpion suit doesn't need to be alien in origin. It just needs to be powerful. It needs to make Gargan a credible physical threat to Spider-Man, which requires significant enhancement, but not necessarily interstellar materials. The Jameson connection is particularly interesting in an EMCU context. Jameson in this universe is a media figure, loud anti-Spider-Man, with a platform and an audience. He's not a newspaper editor with a research budget, but he is someone with influence. And influence in the right circles can be converted into funding. You don't need to write a check directly to a criminal to enable one. You just need to say the right things on the right platforms about Spider-Man being a threat that nobody seems willing to deal with properly. Someone somewhere will hear that and decide to do something about it. Theory: Jameson doesn't know he's funding the Scorpion. He just keeps talking, and someone with resources and a grudge uses his talking as cover for their own project. Theory: Gargan, post-spell, connects with whatever remains of Toomes' network, or connects with someone new, someone funding the creation of anti-Spider-Man weaponry. The suit is built, not with alien tech perhaps, but with the kind of reverse-engineered Stark-adjacent technology that has been proliferating in the EMCU since Homecoming established that such a black market exists. The result is a villain who is fast, strong, specifically designed to fight Spider-Man, and who operates with a personal vendetta that doesn't require any special knowledge of Peter's identity to be dangerous. What makes the Scorpion particularly interesting in a brand new day context is what it would represent thematically. Homecoming was about Peter learning what it means to be a hero without the institutional support of the Avengers. It ended with Toomes in prison and Gargan's threat unresolved, a loose end that the film deliberately left dangling. Brand New Day is, in some ways, a second Homecoming. In the Brand New Day era, Peter Parker is again surrounded by a growing support system. He is again in a homemade suit. He is again a street-level hero, trying to protect Queens and Manhattan without the resources that would make that easier. If Gargan's threat finally pays off in this context, if the villain homecoming seeded finally arrives in the brand new day era, there's a structural neatness to that. Not a repeat, a resolution, the consequences of Peter's very first arc coming back around at the moment when he's most isolated, most vulnerable, most purely himself. That's good storytelling. It doesn't require multiversal mechanics. It doesn't require magical intervention. It just requires someone looking at what was planted and deciding finally to grow it. And where does that leave Adrian Toomes? Adrian Toomes is presumably no longer in prison. He protected Peter's identity from Gargan. He's not, by any straightforward definition, a reformed man. He ran a criminal weapons operation for years and felt fairly fine about it. But he's also not purely villainous. He has a kind of code. He has a daughter he loves. He had reasons, theory. Toomes becomes a reluctant informant. Not to the Avengers, not to S.H.I.E.L.D., but to Spider-Man directly. Two people who share a strange, complicated history, who meet again in a world where one of them has forgotten most of that history, navigating a conversation that is full of things neither of them can entirely say out loud. Toomes still knows, or did know before the spell, that Peter is Spider-Man. The spell erased the name. It may not have erased the pattern recognition that comes from having personally worked out someone's identity through deduction. Intuition is harder to erase than memory. If Toomes ever stood in a room with Peter again, he might not know why, but he'd feel like he recognized something, which is a theory we keep returning to across different characters in different forms. People remember with more than their minds. Norman Osborn came to the MCU and caused an extraordinary amount of damage in a remarkably short period of time. He killed Aunt May. He sabotaged Peter's attempts to cure the other displaced villains. He manipulated and provoked and grinned with that particular Willem Dafoe grin that suggests genuine pleasure in cruelty, which is a very specific and very effective flavour of unsettling. He was, in the brief window of his appearance, a genuinely terrifying presence, not because of his physical power, though the glider and the pumpkin bombs are nothing to dismiss, but because of the intelligence beneath it. Norman Osborn is a genius who went mad, and there is a particular quality to that kind of villainy that the purely physical never quite achieves. He was then cured, his formula stabilised, his fractured personality reintegrated and sent back to his universe along with the other displaced figures. And that, as far as the narrative officially accounts for it, is that. Except, did Oscorp just enter the IMCU? The multiverse doesn't work like a revolving door that leaves no trace. Norman Osborn was physically present in the EMCU for a period of time. He interacted with people. He was in buildings. He was, however briefly, a real person in this universe. Not a projection, not a vision, but a man who took up space and caused effects. That has implications. If Norman made any contact with the outside world during his time here, if he said anything to anyone who wasn't part of the immediate inner circle, if his technology was observed or documented, if any evidence of his presence was recorded, there would be traces. A company called Oscorp exists in his universe. That name might appear somewhere. A technology marker, a communications record, something that doesn't fit the existing corporate landscape of the EMCU. Theory, Oscorp, or something that looks very much like it, begins appearing in the EMCU in the aftermath of No Way Home. Not because Norman founded it here, he didn't have time, but because his presence left a residue, a paper trail, a fragment of his universe's technology that got catalogued by someone and matched to nothing in any known database. And from that fragment, something grows. It might be an MCU corporation that independently develops technology that looks Oscorp adjacent. It might be a government project reverse engineering what little was left behind. It might simply be the name itself, appearing in a database attributed to nothing, flagged as anomalous, filed away until someone starts asking questions. This is how the MCU often seeds its future plots. Not with dramatic announcements, with anomalies that appear in the background of things and wait. Does the cured Norman remember everything? This is a question that doesn't get asked often enough, and I think it's one of the more interesting ones in the entire brand new day theory space. Norman Osborn was cured. The Goblin serum was stabilized. The fractured duality of his personality, the scientist and the monster, was reintegrated into a single, functional self. But the memory of what happened doesn't get erased just because the personality does. Norman returned to his universe as a sane man who, if he can hold a thought together long enough to process it, now has a complete memory of being in a different universe, of meeting other versions of Spider-Man, of being there when Aunt May died, of holding the cures that Peter Parker created for him, and of knowing that Peter Parker, whose name and face Norman would still remember, because the spell didn't reach across universes, is Spider-Man. Theory. There exists, in Norman Osborn's universe, a man who is sane, brilliant, horrified by what he did, and in possession of detailed knowledge of at least one other Spider-Man in another reality. What he does with that knowledge is the interesting question. Does he try to reach out? Does he bury it? Does it fuel a new kind of obsession, different from the Goblin, but equally consuming? The most unsettling version of this theory, Norman, now sane, becomes a specific kind of threat. Not a screaming, glider-riding monster. A composed, methodical man who knows exactly what he did and is trying to figure out what it means. That version of Norman Osborn, quietly dangerous in a suit, is perhaps more frightening than the Goblin mask ever was. In the Tobey Maguire films, Harry Osborn was one of the central characters, Peter's best friend who eventually became his enemy, in one of the more genuinely tragic arcs of those films. In the Andrew Garfield films, Harry appeared briefly, played by Dane DeHaan, and his deterioration into villainy was compressed into a single film in ways that frustrated many viewers. The AMCU has never introduced a Harry Osborn, and given that Norman's existence has now been acknowledged within the universe, even if most people don't remember why, there is a door open. Theory. Harry Osborn exists in the MCU. Perhaps he always has, as part of an Osborn family presence that predates Norman's multiverse arrival. Perhaps he appears as a result of that arrival. In some narrative logic, the story works out. Either way, a Harry who is Peter's age, who could be introduced as a peer at ESU, as a new neighbour, as a young man from a wealthy family navigating his own complications, is a character the MCU has the space to take somewhere neither of the previous franchises could. The previous films had to rush Harry toward villainy because they were working against their own ending dates. The EMCU has time. It could build a Harry who is a genuine friend first, not a subplot, not a device, but a person, and let the tragedy emerge slowly. That would be something worth watching, even if it took 3 films to get there. There's one more angle worth exploring on the Osborn question, and it's less about Norman specifically, and more about what his technology represents. The Green Goblin serum was a super soldier formula that went wrong. Or right, depending on how you look at it, it created something extraordinarily powerful, just not controllable. And the history of super soldier programs in the EMCU is not exactly one of responsible stewardship. Every government-backed attempt to recreate Rogers' serum has produced disaster. Blonsky, the Hulk program, the various Winter Soldier experiments, and others. What happens when someone gets access to data on a serum that made a man both physically superhuman and genuinely volatile? What if SWORD or a private company, or a particularly ambitious individual, decided that the volatility was the part worth replicating? Theory. The Goblin formula doesn't die with Norman's departure. It lives on in whatever documentation, observation, or analysis anyone in the MCU's scientific community could gather from the aftermath of the Statue of Liberty battle. And eventually, someone tries to build on it. The result doesn't have to be another goblin. It just has to be another person who received more power than they could contain, and whose instability becomes Peter's problem. That's a very Spider-Man problem. The fallout from someone else's experiment, arriving in someone else's life, requiring someone with no backup to clean it up. Same as it ever was. There is something sitting in a bar in the MCU. Something small and dark and alive. Something that doesn't belong. In the No Way Home post-credits scene, Eddie Brock is briefly transported into the MCU. He sits at a bar, gets caught up to speed on the last 15 years of superhero activity in what is clearly overwhelming fashion. And then, when Strange's spell begins pulling things back, disappears, the bartender blinks, the glass is empty. It's as though Eddie was never there. But the camera finds a detail. A small piece of symbiote remains on the bar top. A fragment, dark and glistening, that didn't make it back with Eddie. Too small perhaps to be caught by the spell, or perhaps the spell doesn't apply to alien organisms. Either way. There is a piece of living alien symbiote somewhere in New York City, and the MCU has said nothing about it since. Where did it go? The most immediately practical question, and also the most fun to think about. A fragment of alien organism in a public bar has a fairly limited number of outcomes. Option 1, someone cleaned it up. A bartender wiped down the counter, and the symbiote, deprived of a host, disoriented in an unfamiliar environment, died. This is the least interesting outcome, and almost certainly not what the MCU is planning. Option 2, it survived. A symbiote's defining characteristic is its drive to bond with a host. It is, at a biological level, an organism whose entire survival strategy is attachment to another living being. A fragment separated from its parent organism, alone in an unfamiliar world, would not sit passively on a bar. It would seek. What it found first would depend on proximity. A rat, perhaps. An insect. Something small and warm that happened to be near enough when the fragment began actively looking. From there, using a series of hosts, growing incrementally with each bond, making its way through the dark spaces of New York towards something bigger. This is actually how symbiote origin stories work in the comics. The organism is patient, and its patience is one of the things that makes it genuinely frightening. It doesn't need to make a dramatic entrance. It just needs time. This is the theory that I think the EMCU is building toward, and it's the one I find most emotionally resonant. Consider Peter Parker's state in Brand New Day. He is alone in a way that very few people have ever been alone. He has no family, no friends, no one who knows his name. He goes out every night and protects a city that doesn't know he exists, and then he comes home to a modest apartment and sits with that. A symbiote is, at its core, an organism that bonds. It attaches to its host and forms a relationship of mutual dependency. It amplifies the host's physical abilities, yes, but also their emotions, their drives, their darkness. In hosts who are psychologically well supported, this amplification tends toward aggression. In hosts who are isolated, who feel powerless or ignored or consumed by grief, it tends towards something more specifically dangerous. The black suit story, when it was first introduced in the comics, was always about the seduction of relief. Peter put on the alien suit and felt better. Stronger, yes, but more than that, calmer. The constant noise of anxiety and responsibility and the weight of everyone depending on him went quiet. The suit absorbed it, and for a while it felt like healing. The trap, of course, was that the suit was feeding on those feelings, using them, growing stronger on his pain in ways that would ultimately consume him if he didn't cut the connection. In the MCU, with a Peter who has lost everything, who has more grief and isolation to offer a symbiote than perhaps any previous host, the seduction would be even more profound. The black suit could arrive not as an upgrade or an accessory, but as company, as something that feels for a time like being known again. That's a genuinely frightening and genuinely sad story, the counterpoint to the Peter theory, and the one grounded more firmly in comics history. After Eddie Brock, the Venom symbiote bonded with Mac Gargan the Scorpion for a period. Gargan, as a host, was less stable than Brock and significantly more violent. The symbiote appeared to enjoy this, or at least to respond to it. Gargan with the symbiote was genuinely unpleasant in a way that the comics did not shy away from. If Gargan is being positioned as a villain in the Brand New Day MCU, a possibility we discussed in the previous section, then having the symbiote find him before it finds Peter would create a specific and spectacular escalation. Gargan, already dangerous, already specifically motivated against Spider-Man, now also bonded with an alien organism that amplifies his aggression and gifts him the physical capabilities to be an existential threat. Against a Peter in a handmade suit with no cavalry to call and no tech advantage to fall back on. That's a fairly bleak prospect, which, in the context of a sleep video, I want to assure you is delivered gently and is very much a theory rather than a certainty. I want to step back from the plot mechanics for a moment and spend some time with what the symbiote means. In every version of the Black Suit story, the comics, the animated series, the Sam Raimi film, the suit functions as a metaphor for the things we lean on when we're in pain that end up hurting us. The substances and habits and relationships and thought patterns that provide relief in the short term and demand a price in the long one. The suit makes Peter feel better, and then the suit makes Peter worse, not immediately, not through obvious harm, but through a slow alteration of who he is and how he responds to the world. The aggression becomes ordinary. The restraint he has always exercised, the deliberate choice to pull punches, to protect people, even at the cost of efficiency, starts to feel like a waste of energy. And by the time he recognizes what is happening, the suit has become difficult to remove, because removing it means returning to the pain it was managing. That story, with a Peter who is at his most isolated and his most grieving, in a brand new day that is as bare and empty as his life has ever been, that story could be devastating in the best possible way. It could be the deepest and most personal arc any MCU Peter Parker film has attempted. Not a battle for the world, a battle for himself. The fragment left behind in that bar is small. We should note that. It's not Venom-sized. It's not enough to immediately do what Venom does. It would take time to grow, to find hosts, to build itself towards something capable of the kind of bond it's looking for. Time, in storytelling terms, is useful. It means the symbiote doesn't need to appear in Spider-Man 4. It could be building quietly through that film's events, like a slow tide coming in. And by the time it arrives properly, by the time Peter encounters it, or Gargan encounters it, or whoever encounters it, we've had a film's worth of context for what it's going to mean. The EMCU plays long games when it wants to. It planted the Infinity Stones across years of films before bringing them together. It seeded Thanos in a post-credits scene in 2012 and didn't pay it off until 2018. A fragment on a bar in 2021, arriving at its destination in 2027 or 2028. That is entirely within the rhythm of how this universe operates. Let's slow down for a moment, set aside the villains and the magic and the multiverse, and think about something more immediate. What does Tuesday look like for Peter Parker? It's a question that the franchise has rarely had to answer before. Homecoming was high school. Far From Home was a school trip. No Way Home was a crisis. At no point in 3 films and assorted appearances across the Avengers saga did Peter Parker have an ordinary Tuesday that went the way ordinary Tuesdays go for ordinary people. He has them now. He must have them now, because he's a person who exists in the world, and the world is full of Tuesdays. The question of how Peter fills those Tuesdays, what he eats, where he works, what he studies, how he moves through a city that doesn't know his name, is, I'd argue, one of the more interesting creative territories opened up by Brand New Day. The absence of every supporting character is not just a loss, it's a blank page. Where does he live? The final scenes of No Way Home show Peter in a small apartment. Modest is probably the charitable word. Humble is perhaps more accurate. It is a room in a building in a neighbourhood that is clearly not the comfortable middle-class Queens of his childhood home, or May's cheerful apartment, or Happy's rather generously appointed place. It is the apartment of someone who is managing on their own with the means available to them. There's no map, but the visual language suggests somewhere in the city that is still New York, but is not the version of New York that appears on postcards. Theory: Peter lives in the Bronx or the outer edges of Brooklyn, somewhere dense, working class, full of the kind of community fabric that gives a street-level Spider-Man a reason to be present. He knows his neighbours by sight, if not by name. He knows which bodega is open at 3 a.m. because he's visited it after patrol. He is, in the most literal sense, a neighbourhood Spider-Man, not protecting a brand or an institution, but protecting a specific collection of streets and the specific people who live on them. That rootedness matters. It's the thing that distinguishes Spider-Man from most other superheroes in the MCU. He's not guarding the world, he's guarding his corner of it. Peter's MIT application was presumably erased along with everything else. No application, no record of his academic performance, no teachers who remember him. He is, academically speaking, a blank slate in a universe that requires documentation for almost everything. The most obvious path is Empire State University, ESU in the comics, a fictional New York institution that has been Peter's home turf through much of his publishing history. ESU has none of the prestige of MIT, but all of the practical utility. It's in New York, it's accessible, and it's the kind of place a young person with an extraordinary mind and a complicated history might turn up with imperfect documentation and still manage to make something work. Theory: Peter enrolls at ESU using whatever records he can reconstruct or create, and finds himself in an environment that is simultaneously humbling and galvanizing. He is, without the context of his history, simply a very bright young man who doesn't always look like he's slept. His professors find him interesting. His classmates find him strange. He makes no close friends immediately because he is not yet sure what friendship is supposed to look like in a life this empty. The laboratory is where he's most comfortable. It always has been. And the lab asks no questions about who you are. It just asks you to be precise. A genius-level scientist without a verifiable degree, without professional references, without a paper trail of any kind, trying to earn a living in New York City. This is a genuinely difficult situation, and I appreciate that thinking through it makes Peter Parker's brand new day feel more real rather than more heroic. He can build things. He can fix things. He understands technology at a level that most repair technicians can't access. Theory: Peter works as a freelance electronics repair person, informal, cash-based, operating through word of mouth in his neighbourhood. He fixes phones and laptops and the kinds of small appliances that people want, fixed and don't want to pay a shop for. He earns enough to pay rent and not much more. There's a second theory that the comics purists will appreciate. Peter becomes a photographer, a Daily Bugle photographer specifically. This is such a classically Spider-Man arrangement that it almost feels too neat. Peter in the comics supported himself for years by selling photographs of Spider-Man to J. Jonah Jameson, who used them in anti-Spider-Man articles while Peter quietly cashed the checks. The joke was always in the absurdity of the arrangement, Spider-Man funding his own persecution through his secret photographic access. In the brand new day context, this would have an added layer. Peter doesn't need to stage the photographs. He is Spider-Man. He can be in every shot. He can deliver images that no other photographer in New York could possibly capture, because no other photographer is simultaneously the subject and the person behind the lens. Jameson would never understand how he does it, and Peter would never tell him. J. Jonah Jameson in the MCU is a media personality, a podcaster journalist type, rather than a newspaper editor, which modernizes him without losing the essential flavor of the character. He is loud, certain, anti-Spider-Man, and deeply convinced of his own rightness in all matters. He does not know Peter Parker exists. He has no specific grudge against any specific person. He just genuinely dislikes Spider-Man as a concept, which is its own kind of commitment. The dynamic between Peter and Jameson in the Brand New Day setting would have a particular comedy to it. Jameson is ranting about Spider-Man to an audience using photographs that a mysterious young man keeps appearing to sell him, and that young man keeps listening to the rant with the specific expression of someone who has things to say but has chosen not to say them. It's a comedy of suppression. Peter sitting on the knowledge that Jameson is simultaneously his main income source and his most vocal critic, unable to address either fact without unraveling the other. That's very Spider-Man energy. The homemade suit that Peter builds at the end of No Way Home is not just practical clothing. It's a statement. Everything Peter had before, the Stark-designed tech suit, the Iron Spider armor, the various upgrades, was built by someone else, or built with someone else's resources. The suit he makes from scratch alone in his apartment is entirely his. Theory. The suit evolves through future films, as Peter does. Each upgrade is his own work, not a Tony Stark gift, not a SHIELD provision. When Peter adds a new feature or improves on the design, it reflects what he's learned and what he's needed. The suit becomes a visual autobiography. In Homecoming, the suit was a brand new Stark-built suit that he filled. In No Way Home's ending, the suit is something he made. The difference between those two things is the entire arc of Peter Parker's growth as a hero. The Brand New Day suit is the purest expression of who he is, which is, perhaps, why it had to cost him everything else to arrive at it. The Avengers know that Spider-Man exists. He fought beside them in the ruins of the Avengers compound in upstate New York during the Battle of Earth, years after the Battle of New York. He appeared in Germany during the conflict that split the team in two. He was on Titan. He was at the final battle against Thanos, where Iron Man made the snap that cost him his life. Spider-Man has been a recurring presence across some of the most consequential moments in the Avengers' history. They just don't know who he is. Not anymore. From their perspective, from Sam Wilson's perspective, from Bruce Banner's, from Thor's if he happens to be paying attention, from every surviving Avengers perspective, Spider-Man is a mystery, an unknown hero, someone who keeps showing up, does good work, and vanishes. Young, clearly, probably from New York. Beyond that, nothing. They've always known they were working alongside someone. They now have absolutely no framework for who that someone is. Sam Wilson is carrying one of the heaviest symbolic loads in the entire EMCU at the moment. He picked up Steve Rogers' shield. He accepted the title. He is now operating in a world that is still processing what that means. A black man carrying a symbol that has always been presented as racially uncomplicated, navigating a country and a world that is not quite ready to let that be simple. And somewhere in that world, there's a young Spider-Man doing street-level work in New York, without affiliation, without support, without so much as a health insurance plan. Theory, Sam, in his capacity as Captain America, reaches out to Spider-Man. Not immediately, not dramatically, just a message, passed through whatever channels reach vigilantes, asking if they'd be open to a conversation. The interesting dynamic is that Sam doesn't know he's talking to a teenager. He doesn't know this is a kid who used to be Tony Stark's mentee. He's just meeting Spider-Man, for what, from his perspective, is the first time. And Spider-Man, who remembers Civil War, who remembers the airport fight, who remembers what it felt like to be a 15-year-old thrown into a battle between superheroes, would be meeting Sam from a position of asymmetric knowledge. Sam would be introducing himself as though to a stranger. Peter would know everything about him and would have to decide what to do with that. That's a genuinely strange and interesting first meeting, and it would sit differently for Peter than for Sam, which is fertile ground for character work. Of all the Avengers adjacent figures in Peter's life, Happy Hogan's situation in Brand New Day is the one that I find most quietly heartbreaking. Happy lost Tony Stark. He was there for the grief, the memorial, the settling of Tony's extraordinary estate. He processed that loss over time, in the way that people process significant losses. Not fully, not neatly, but enough to function. And then when the Green Goblin killed her, he lost Aunt May. Not through her death, he presumably was there for that. However that appears in his current memory, but through the erasure of any context for why it affected him. He remembers May perhaps, a woman. He may even remember that she died. But the relational web that connected her to him, through Peter, through caring about Peter, through being part of Peter's life, is gone. He has grief for someone he can't quite explain the significance of. He also lost Peter entirely. Not just the memory of Peter, but presumably the memory of every moment they shared. The airport, the trips, the conversations in the van, all of it, gone. Happy Hogan is a man with unexplained grief sitting in his chest and no way to find its source. Theory. Happy starts unconsciously seeking something. He doesn't know what. He changes habits. He volunteers more. He appears at events he normally wouldn't. He is, without knowing it, looking for the people he's missing. And one of those people, in a homemade suit, is still swinging through the city Happy lives in. The moment they meet again, and they will eventually, whether Peter allows it or it happens by accident, will mean everything to Peter and nothing to Happy, at least initially. And Peter will have to decide whether to let Happy know who he is or to protect him by remaining a stranger. That's the same decision he made at the coffee shop with MJ, except Happy would push harder. Happy is the type. There is somewhere in the MCU's landscape a memorial to Tony Stark, the man who made the snap, who saved half the universe at the cost of his own life, one of the most significant figures in human history, by any measurement. And there is, somewhere in the footage and the photographs from that final battle, a figure in a red and blue suit, young, moving differently from the others, clearly grief-stricken as Tony fell. Nobody knows who it is, not anymore. Theory. Peter visits Tony's memorial in civilian clothes. He goes alone, in the middle of the night or the early morning, and he stands there for a long time. And people around him, if there are people, see a young man who appears to have a very personal relationship with a monument to someone he has no verifiable connection to. That's a scene I'd like to see played quietly, with almost no dialogue. Just Peter, and the weight of what was given to him, and what he gave back, and the strange ache of being the only person who remembers the specific shape of that relationship. Will Peter rejoin the Avengers? The Brand New Day implies a solo era. Peter, on his own, without institutional connection. And narratively, that isolation is part of what makes the period interesting. But it's worth asking whether that's permanent or transitional. Theory, in the long run, probably across the build-up to whatever Secret Wars adjacent event is coming, Peter formally becomes part of the Avengers. But without a civilian identity attached. He's Spiderman, who is also an Avenger. Nobody knows his name, nobody knows his face. He has the most thoroughly secured secret identity of anyone in the MCU. Not because he worked hard to protect it, but because a spell of catastrophic scale did it for him. That version of Peter in the Avengers, useful, capable, trusted, but entirely anonymous, is a genuinely new thing for the character. He has always been defined, partly, by the tension between his heroic and civilian lives. If the civilian life is functionally erased, the tension changes shape. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes something different, something quieter, something more internal, something that nobody around him can see, which is probably the loneliest thing about it. Strange sealed the multiversal rift, or more precisely, Strange cast a spell that closed the specific rifts opened by the fractured original spell. The 5 villains were sent back. The other 2 Spider-Men went home. The fractures in reality were sutured. The multiverse, as far as the immediate situation was concerned, was addressed. But addressed and healed are not the same thing. And the MCU has been careful, in the material that followed No Way Home, not to suggest that everything is fine. Multiverse of Madness, released about 5 months after No Way Home, in the EMCU's theatrical calendar, shows a Strange who is aware that his actions have had consequences. He mentions the events of No Way Home. He acknowledges that fractures were opened. He is, throughout that film, a man managing the aftermath of something he partly caused. The multiverse is not closed, it was stabilized. There's a difference. Multiverse of Madness introduced the concept of incursions, moments where two universes collide, one destroying the other. The Illuminati of Earth 838 described incursions as the risk of multiversal travel, when a sorcerer moves between universes too aggressively, or dreamwalks, while their own universe isn't properly insulated, the universes can begin to press against each other. This is the premise that presumably feeds into whatever comes next at the Avengers scale. An incursion-level event, potentially the Secret Wars concept, where multiple universes collapse into each other, would be a multiversal catastrophe requiring a multiversal response. And Peter Parker, whether he likes it or not, is someone whose fingerprints are on the current state of multiversal instability. He is the reason Strange cast the spell that caused the rifts in the first place. He is the reason 5 displaced figures crossed universes. He is, in a very direct sense, part of why the multiverse is in the condition it's in. Theory. When the incursion-level threat arrives, whenever that is, in whatever film it arrives in, Peter's involvement is not coincidental. He is sought out, or he stumbles in, or the damage reaches him first because the universe has a perverse sense of a narrative responsibility. He is not simply a bystander to the multiverse's condition, he contributed to it, and at some level, the AMC will probably ask him to contribute to the resolution. Was the rift fully closed? Here's a theory that circulates in a quieter corner of the fandom, and I think it's worth giving proper attention. The rift that opened when the spell fractured was enormous. 5 villains, 2 Spidermen, various incidental multiverse effects. Strange repaired it, yes. But there's a meaningful question of whether a repair is the same as an original seal. Think of it like a broken bone. You set it, it heals, it's functional, but the place where it broke is the place most likely to break again. The structural integrity of that particular spot is permanently different from what it was before the fracture. Theory. There is a specific thin spot in the MCU's version of reality, in the location where the original fracture occurred, which would be somewhere above New York City, that is more susceptible to multiverse events than anywhere else on Earth. Strange knows about it. He monitors it. He has placed protections on it that he reviews regularly, and it's possible that Peter unknowingly lives near it, probably below it actually, given the Statue of Liberty is where the climax happened, and Queens is not far from there. A thin spot in reality, directly above a neighborhood where an anonymous young man in a homemade suit goes out every night to protect people. The multiverse, if it ever cracked open again, would crack open near him. The Time Variance Authority, as reconstituted after the events of Loki, now operates under different parameters than it originally did. The sacred timeline, the one correct version of events that the TVA once enforced, no longer exists in the same form. The multiverse has been allowed to proliferate, with the TVA shifting its focus from elimination of variants to management of catastrophic branching events, which raises a question. What does the TVA make of what happened in No Way Home? It was objectively a significant branching event. The multiverse was cracked open and then partially resealed. Individuals crossed between realities. The timeline of the AMCU's primary universe was significantly altered by the complete erasure of one person from everyone's memory. Theory. The TVA has a file on Peter Parker. Not because he's a villain or a variant to be pruned, but because he is a chronological anomaly, a person who no longer exists in the memories of the people in his universe, but who is still present within it. He doesn't match the timeline's documented people because he was erased from the documentation. From the TVEY's perspective, Peter Parker is a person who shouldn't be there. Not a threat, just a genuine administrative puzzle. A man who appears to be alive in a universe that has no record of him ever having been born. The possibility of a TVA agent arriving in Peter's life, calm, strange, carrying what amounts to a warrant for his existence, is the kind of absurdist complication that the EMCU's tonal range could absolutely accommodate. Played quietly, it could be quite funny and quite unsettling at the same time. I want to end this section with a thought that isn't specifically tied to a single theory, but which I think is worth sitting with. Peter Parker will spend years in Brand New Day living with what he did. Not guilty, exactly. He made the right choice, and I think some part of him knows that, but aware of it, aware of the shape of the world he lives in, and the part he played in creating it. The multiverse is fragile partly because of him. It was repaired partly because of him. The villains who were saved, who returned to their universes with a chance at better lives, have those lives because of him. The people in those universes who didn't get killed by those villains, a whole cascade of unnamed, uncountable people, are alive because of what Peter chose. He will rarely be thanked for any of it. Not one person in his universe knows his name. Not one newspaper carries the story. Not one soul stands up and says, "That young man from Queens, the one with no family and a homemade suit, saved the multiverse." Officially, the events of No Way Home did happen. But it did. And somewhere in a modest apartment, above a city that has forgotten him, a young man sits in the dark and knows that it did. That is enough. It has to be enough. Two men went home. When Strange's spell finally completed, when the rifts were sealed and the multiverse stopped bleeding into itself, the other two versions of Peter Parker crossed back into their respective universes. The Tobey Maguire Peter went back to his world. The Andrew Garfield Peter went back to his. Neither of them knew for certain what they were returning to, and the MCU has said nothing about them since, which is partly just a practical matter of jurisdictions and rights arrangements. But it's also a genuine narrative open question, and one that the fandom has been working with considerable enthusiasm. The oldest of the three Spidermen, and I'm being careful here, because I want to be respectful of the fact that these are characters from different iterations of the franchise who now, officially, share a universe, arrived in No Way Home carrying a specific kind of settled sadness. He had been Spider-Man for a long time. He had lost things. He had also, he mentioned, found his way back to some of them. It didn't make it better, he said. He had reconnected with his MJ, the one who had always been there, waiting for him to stop running from the parts of himself he found difficult. His arc in No Way Home was not one of discovery, but of confirmation. He had already learned most of his lessons. He was there to help teach them to a version of himself who hadn't had the years to learn them on his own. And there was a quiet grace in that, the oldest version showing the youngest one how to carry the weight without being crushed by it. Theory. When Tobey's Peter returned home, he returned to something approaching peace. Not uncomplicated. Peter Parker doesn't do uncomplicated, but grounded. The experience of meeting two other versions of himself, of fighting alongside them, of watching one of them make a sacrifice he himself once made in a different form, probably gave him a perspective that his own world hadn't offered. He knows now that Spider-Man is a specific kind of person regardless of the universe. That the choices they all make follow the same moral grammar. That whatever grief and loss marks each of their lives, it marks them toward the same conclusion. Keep going. Keep protecting. Keep choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. There's comfort in that, I think, even across universes. Andrew's Peter arrived in No Way Home in a different state entirely. He had not found peace. He He was still in the long aftermath of Gwen Stacy's death, still defined by the failure to catch her, by the moment the web reached her and the impact was too hard and she was gone. That failure had shaped everything that came after. It had made him doubt himself, doubt his choices, doubt whether someone like him should be allowed close to people. And then in the chaos of the Statue of Liberty battle, he caught someone. MJ fell. Our MJ, the MCU's version, a dark-haired girl falling in the same terrible way, at the same terrible speed. And Andrew's Peter, who had spent years not being fast enough or good enough or present enough, was there. He got there, he caught her, he wept, holding her, in the grip of something that wasn't quite grief, and wasn't quite relief, something more complex, something that lives at the intersection of the two. He said, "I got you." It is honestly one of the most moving moments in the entire EMCU's history. Not because it's about these specific characters in isolation, but because of what it represents, the possibility of a second chance. Not for Gwen, that door is closed, but for the man who lost her, the possibility that he is not permanently defined by his worst moments, that there is still something left to save. Theory, Andrew's Peter returned home different. Not healed, grief doesn't heal in a single moment, even a moment as significant as that one, but changed. He had done something he had been unable to do before, and the impossibility of undoing Gwen's death didn't prevent that from meaning something. There is a version of Andrew's Peter post No Way Home who starts allowing himself to be close to people again, slowly, carefully, with all the wariness of someone who's been hurt badly, but trying. That would be a beautiful arc if it ever got told. Here's a theory that I find structurally elegant and emotionally satisfying in roughly equal measure. 3 people shared an experience that is, as far as we know, unique in the history of the multiverse. 3 versions of the same person, from 3 different universes, fighting side by side with full knowledge of their shared identity. They understood each other immediately, not because of anything specific they said, but because each of them recognized the particular quality of the weight the others were carrying. The spell returned them to their universes, but the experience itself cannot be erased. The memory of it, the record of it in their own consciousness, persists. Theory: the 3 Spider-Men are now cosmically linked, not literally connected, not sharing thoughts or sensations, but woven together in a way that means when the multiverse needs them, when something vast enough happens, that one Peter Parker isn't enough, they will find each other again. This is the theory that seeds neatly into the Secret Wars concept. An event large enough to require all 3. A convergence that feels inevitable, not because the plot demands it, but because those 3 people, having met, having recognized each other, would not be able to stay apart when the stakes became genuinely existential. There is a more extreme version of this conversation that circulates in certain parts of the fandom, the suggestion that Andrew Garfield's Peter, having made his peace in our universe, somehow stayed. That the character audiences responded to so strongly in No Way Home ended up woven into the MCU's fabric in ways that haven't been made explicit yet. This is, to be clear, almost certainly not true. The mechanics of the spell and the clear visual language of the ending don't support it. Both non-MCU Peters went back, but the wish behind the theory is real, and it says something genuine about what people wanted from that film. Andrew's performance in No Way Home is widely regarded as one of the best pieces of character work in the entire EMCU. A man returning to a role he was told was finished and demonstrating, definitively, that the work hadn't been done yet. Audiences didn't want him to go home because they had only just properly met him. The theory that he stayed is a theory born from the feeling that something was unfinished, that there was more story in that particular Peter than one film could hold, and maybe there is. Maybe the linked by experience theory eventually finds a way to bring him back, formally and explicitly, in something large enough to justify it. The multiverse, after all, has already demonstrated a willingness to open when the right pressure is applied. What I find most interesting about the three Spider-Men as a collective is what they collectively represent for the EMCU's understanding of its own character. By acknowledging Tobey's Peter and Andrew's Peter, by making them canon, by giving them agency and dignity and emotional arcs within the story, the MCU did something fairly unusual. It said, every version of this story was real. Every sacrifice made in those earlier films counted. None of it was erased by the reboot. It just happened in a different universe, and that makes it no less true. That's a generous philosophy about storytelling, about legacy, about the relationship between the current version of a thing and all the versions that came before. And it means that our Peter, Tom Holland's Peter, alone in his flat with his homemade suit, is carrying not just his own history, but the resonance of everyone who was Spider-Man before him. That's a lot to carry. And also I think he a comfort. We've been working from the MCU outward for most of this video, using the films and the shows as our anchor and then drifting out into theory. But I want to spend some time now going the other direction, starting in the comics and working toward the MCU, looking at what the source material actually did with Brand New Day and what that might tell us about where Peter's story goes next. Because the comics did quite a lot with it, more than is generally remembered, I think. To understand Brand New Day, you have to understand what preceded it. One More Day is the story that made Brand New Day necessary. The short version, which we touched on briefly in the opening, Aunt May is dying, shot by a sniper. The wound is beyond medicine. Peter, desperate, approaches various powerful figures and is told, across the board, that nothing can be done. And then Mephisto arrives, a demon, a deal maker. He can save May. The cost? Peter and MJ's marriage. Their love, specifically their love, is what Mephisto wants. He feeds on happiness, apparently. And the love between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson is a particularly rich vintage. After considerable anguish, the deal is made. May lives. The marriage never happened. Peter wakes up single. The moral complexity of this, the idea that Peter effectively traded the adult life he had built for the safety of a parental figure, was immediately and intensely debated. Many readers felt it was a regression, a erasure of years of character development. Others felt it was true to Spider-Man's core tragedy, the idea that Peter Parker can never quite hold on to happiness without losing something else. The EMCU equivalent isn't a deal with a demon. It's a choice Peter made freely, under duress, without being manipulated by any supernatural figure. That's a different kind of story. In some ways more tragic, because there's no Mephisto to blame. Peter looked at what was in front of him and chose the sacrifice. That changes what the Brand New Day that follows means. The Brand New Day arc ran from 2008 to roughly 2010, across a period where the Amazing Spider-Man comic was publishing 3 times a month with rotating creative teams. The intent was ambitious: make Spider-Man feel exciting and unpredictable again. Introduce new characters, build a new status quo. The results were genuinely mixed by critical consensus, but there are elements of Brand New Day that are considered genuinely good Spider-Man storytelling. And those elements are the ones most worth looking at for MCU purposes. The tone was deliberately lighter than the preceding years. Peter was struggling financially, professionally, romantically, the classic Parker luck in full effect. But the storytelling moved faster, with more humour, more of the sense that being Spider-Man was an adventure rather than a perpetual catastrophe. The classic tension between Peter's life and Spider-Man's life was restored because Peter had a life worth protecting again. That tonal shift is something the EMC you could genuinely use. No Way Home is not a light film. It is a film about grief and sacrifice and the cost of growing up. After it, a Spider-Man film that found room for laughter. Not MCU quip machine laughter, but the kind of dark comedy that comes from Peter Parker's specific brand of terrible luck would be a genuine tonal contrast. Mr. Negative. Of the villains introduced in the Brand New Day era, the one most worthy of the MCU's attention is Mr. Negative. His real name is Martin Lee. He is, in his public persona, a philanthropist, a wealthy man who runs soup kitchens and homeless shelters and community initiatives in New York. He is specifically someone who does concrete good for people the city has failed. In his private persona, he is Mr. Negative, a crime lord with the ability to generate a dark energy that he can use as a weapon, and to corrupt others, twisting their moral alignment, inverting their loyalties, turning allies into enemies with a touch. The duality is the point. Lee genuinely believes in both halves of himself. The philanthropist is real. The crime lord is real. He is not wearing a mask over a true face. He has two true faces. For the MCU, Martin Lee is almost comically well positioned. He's visually striking, black and white energy crackling off a composed, well-dressed man. He has moral complexity. He operates in the exact kind of New York underworld that a Brand New Day Peter Parker would be navigating. He's never been adapted in a major live-action production. He feels fresh. Theory: Mr. Negative is the primary villain of Spider-Man 4. He runs the charitable organisations that the neighbourhood Peter protects depends on. He is, from Peter's ground-level perspective, one of the good guys, until Peter sees what happens in Mr. Negative's offices after hours and realises that the man who feeds the neighbourhood also runs it. That's a story with a genuine moral complication at its centre. Peter can't just punch this one away. He can't destroy Martin Lee without destroying the good that Martin Lee does. He has to find a way through the grey area, which is where Spider-Man is always at his best. One More Day introduced a new love interest, Carly Cooper, a forensic scientist and close friend of Lily Hollister. Carly was designed to be someone genuinely compatible with Peter, intelligent, independent, with her own professional life, and priorities that didn't revolve around him. Their relationship developed slowly and felt, to many readers, like a genuine portrayal of how adult friendships becoming romances actually work. She also eventually learned Peter's secret identity, and how she responded to that, with anger initially, and then with the kind of complicated reckoning that the knowledge deserves, was one of the more honest treatments of the "my partner is secretly a superhero" trope in the character's history. For the EMCU, the principle behind Carly is more useful than the specific character. Peter needs a new supporting cast, people who didn't know him before, people he builds genuine relationships with from scratch, without the shorthand that comes from shared history. A Carly equivalent, a woman with her own life and professional gravity who enters Peter's orbit through circumstances unrelated to Spider-Man, and who becomes genuinely important to him before the Spider-Man question becomes relevant, is probably the most natural new love interest the Brand New Day MC you could introduce. Not a replacement for MJ, a new person, a different story, which is, after all, exactly what Brand New Day was supposed to deliver. After Brand New Day proper concluded, writer Dan Slott took over the Spider-Man comics for an extended and extremely ambitious run that included some of the most creative storytelling the character had seen in decades. Slott introduced concepts like Spider Island, where all of Manhattan briefly gained spider powers, Superior Spider-Man, where Dr. Octopus swapped bodies with Peter and tries to be a better Spider-Man than Peter ever was, and helped codify the broader Spider-Verse concept in the comics that eventually became its own animated franchise. The MCU has access to all of this. It doesn't have to adapt any of it directly, but knowing that the Brand New Day era is the runway that leads to Superior Spider-Man, to Spider-Verse, to some of the most inventive Marvel storytelling of the 21st century. Knowing that what feels like a reset is actually a launch pad changes how the isolation and the emptiness of Peter's current situation reads. This isn't an ending with a smaller horizon. This is an ending that, in the source material, opened into something larger and stranger, and more ambitious than anything that came before. The EMCU, if it follows the spirit of that trajectory rather than the letter of any specific storyline, has an extraordinary amount of material to draw from. One final thing from the comics that I want to bring into this discussion, because I think it's underappreciated in our MCU conversations. The Parker luck is a running joke in the comics, the notion that Peter Parker cannot catch a break. Not just in the dramatic sense, but in the small, daily, grinding sense. His rent is late, his camera breaks, he gets fired from a job he needed, he gets recognised as Spider-Man at the wrong moment, he gets unrecognised as Peter Parker at an equally wrong moment. The machinery of his ordinary life is in constant low-level dysfunction. The EMCU Peter has had Parker luck in big doses, the multiverse, the identity exposure, the death of May. But he's been somewhat cushioned from the smaller variety by having institutional support. Tony, May, Ned, Happy, the Avengers infrastructure. In Brand New Day, there is no cushion. The Parker luck lands directly on the man with no buffer between him and it. Theory, the comedy of Spider-Man 4, such as it exists, comes from this. Peter trying to build a life and having the small daily things go wrong in the specific way they always go wrong for Peter Parker. Not tragic, not cinematic, just persistently, wearily, accurately unlucky. And there will be something deeply endearing about watching a young man who has saved the multiverse also lose his Metro card at the worst possible moment. That's Spider-Man. That's always been Spider-Man. We do know Spider-Man 4 is coming on July 31, 2026. We know now that it's called Spider-Man, Brand New Day. We know who is directing it, but not precisely what it's about, or which of these various theories it will decide to honour with its attention. What we do know from the EMCU's general pattern of operation is that it's coming. Tom Holland is under contract. The character is too valuable, too beloved, and too narratively unresolved to simply stop. Peter Parker, with the world erased from his memory, is not an ending. It is a very deliberate pause before the next beginning. So, title, setting, tone, let's drift through the possibilities. What could it be called? Spider-Man, Brand New Day is the obvious choice. It says exactly what the film is about. It resonates with comics readers, and it frames the story as a fresh start rather than a continuation. The risk is that it explains too much. The MCU has tended toward titles that gesture rather than announce. Spider-Man, spectacular, is the theory I hear most often from people with a fondness for the animated series of the same name, which ran from 2008 to 2009 and is widely considered one of the best Spider-Man adaptations ever made. The title has warmth. It implies something slightly lighter than what came before. It has the feel of a show that trusts its own pleasures. Spider-Man Friendly Neighborhood is a callback to Tony Stark's original instruction. Peter should be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. In Brand New Day, that instruction has become Peter's reality by default. There's a quiet irony in it that could work beautifully as a title. Personally, and this is just me speculating in the dark with you, I think the title will reference anonymity or identity in some form. Something that sits with the idea of being known and unknown simultaneously. Something that captures the particular loneliness and freedom of Brand New Day without explaining it outright. But I've been wrong about MCU titles before. Most people have. Where does it take place? The most likely setting remains New York. Spider-Man is a New York story in a way that is nearly non-negotiable. The city is the character's second identity. The texture of the streets as much a part of who he is as the suit and the powers. But which New York? The previous MCU Spider-Man films have used New York as backdrop rather than as subject. The focus was always on Peter's personal circumstances, with the city present but not foregrounded. Brand New Day changes that calculus. A Peter who is genuinely on his own. No Stark tech to lean on. No AI in his ear that we know of. no announced Avengers team up. He's dependent on the city in a more immediate way. The subway, the street vendors, the community centres, the coffee shops. Theory: Spider-Man 4 is the first MCU Spider-Man film that actually feels like it was shot in New York rather than merely set there. Grittier, lower budget visually, despite being an expensive production. The intentional aesthetic of a street-level story. The kind of New York that looks like rain on pavement at 2 a.m. rather than Manhattan skyline at magic hour. This would be a significant tonal departure from what came before, and it would feel right for where Peter is. How much time has passed? No Way Home ends in winter. Snow on the streets, cold breath, the particular grey of a New York December. Theory: Spider-Man 4 does not begin the morning after, it begins 4 years later. A time jump of that length gives the story room to breathe. Peter has had time to establish his new life, the apartment, the routine, whatever he's doing for income, the daily rhythms of a brand new day existence. He has had time to process, not completely, but enough to function. The raw grief of the opening has settled into something more like habit. 4 years also means Peter is now 21, still young, still defined by the particular kind of overwhelm that comes from growing up too fast in the wrong direction, but old enough that the film doesn't need to do the work of establishing a character who's just lost everything. That work is done. We arrive into his life after the immediate aftermath, at the point where his brand new day is actually being lived. Tone: street level or cosmic? The strong theory, and I think the evidence supports it, is that Spider-Man 4 is the most grounded MCU Spider-Man film yet. Street level, personal, concerned with the small-scale damage that a criminal underworld does to the people who live at its edges, rather than the city-ending threats that require Avengers-level intervention. This is partly about where Peter is. Without support, without Stark tech, he cannot meaningfully engage with cosmic-scale threats. He's one person in a homemade suit. He has the same powers he's always had, and he has his intelligence, and that's it. The story has to scale to that reality. It's also partly about tonal contrast. The MCU has spent years building to larger and larger threats, culminating in Endgame and No Way Home's multiverse crisis. A Spider-Man film that deliberately goes small, that finds its drama in a block of flats, a neighbourhood market, a criminal operation that doesn't have world-ending ambitions but does have real immediate power over real immediate people, would be a genuinely refreshing change of register. Counter-argument: the EMCU is building towards Secret Wars, and Spider-Man 4 will almost certainly need to cede some elements of that. The completely isolated street-level story has to exist in a universe that is moving towards something large. The trick will be threading the needle, keeping the immediate story intimate while leaving doors open for what comes after. The best MCU films have always managed this. Iron Man 3 is a personal, small-scale story that still sits comfortably within the larger universe. Captain America: The Winter Soldier is a ground-level political thriller that also advances the Hydra plot. You don't have to choose between the two scales. You just have to be honest about which one is actually driving the story you're telling. For Spider-Man 4, the intimate scale is the story. The larger universe is the horizon. Let's think about who fills the empty seats. MJ is gone, in the sense that she doesn't know Peter, and Peter has chosen not to re-enter her life. Ned is gone, off to MIT, memory erased, a friend who no longer knows he was one. May is gone, Tony is gone, Happy is adrift in his own unexplained grief. The network of people who made Peter Parker's life livable has been, in a very short period, completely dismantled. Brand new day means rebuilding. Not rebuilding the same thing. You can't reconstruct a relationship from scratch and pretend it's the original, but building something new. New people, new dynamics, new rooms in a life that is, for the first time, entirely Peter's own. Who might be in those rooms? Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, is one of the most enduring figures in Spider-Man's comics history, and she has never appeared in the MCU. That feels like an oversight that Brand New Day could correct. Felicia is a thief. Not a murderer, not a terrorist, a thief, motivated by a complex mixture of pragmatism, principle, and the particular kind of adrenaline that comes from being extraordinarily good at something illegal. She is also intelligent, charismatic, and fiercely independent. She does not need Spider-Man. She is not a victim who requires saving. She is a professional with her own code, operating in the same city, sometimes in the same buildings. As a superhero, she happens to find interesting. The original dynamic between Black Cat and Spider-Man in the comics is largely about the masks. Felicia was initially interested in Spider-Man as Spider-Man, the suit, the power, the particular quality of presence that being a superhero gives a person. She was much less interested in Peter Parker, the clumsy, unlucky, perpetually broke young man who existed underneath it. In the Brand New Day context, this dynamic would have a specific resonance. Peter is now in some ways more Spider-Man than he's ever been. His civilian identity is a blank page. If someone fell for the mask, if Felicia arrived and found Spider-Man interesting before she found Peter anything at all, the question of whether Peter is comfortable with being known only as the hero would be a genuinely new kind of conflict for him to navigate. He has spent 3 films trying to protect his civilian identity. Now he barely has one. What does it mean to be loved for the part of yourself you made up? That's an interesting question. Felicia Hardy would make it interesting to answer. Flash Thompson appears in the Homecoming era MCU as a bully, specifically the kind of social bully that exists at academically competitive schools, the one who uses status and verbal dismissal rather than physical intimidation. He was never a major character, and his bullying of Peter was played fairly lightly. In the Brand New Day context, Flash Thompson offers a specific opportunity. He doesn't remember Peter. From his perspective, he has no history with anyone named Peter Parker. He's simply a young man navigating his post-high school life, carrying whatever his own anxieties and insecurities have settled into. And if Peter encounters him, at ESU perhaps, or simply through the overlapping geography of a New York life, they meet as strangers. Neither of them carries the weight of the previous dynamic. The theory, they become friends. Not because Peter has forgiven anything. The spell took the injury along with the memory, but simply because 2 people meeting without context, who share a history neither of them can access, might find that they actually get on. In the comics, Flash Thompson becomes one of Peter's best and most complicated friendships, and eventually, in a storyline that is far ahead of where we are now, bonds with the Venom symbiote to become Agent Venom, a war veteran using its power in service of the country. None of that has to happen in Spider-Man 4, but the groundwork of a friendship could be laid, something that, down the line, means what it needs to mean. A new mentor who steps into the void. Tony Stark's absence from Peter's life is enormous, not just emotionally, but practically. Tony was the person who provided resources, who offered backup, who gave Peter the technology and institutional scaffolding that allowed him to operate as effectively as he did. The Brand New Day. Peter has none of that, and he doesn't want a replacement. Part of what the ending of No Way Home represents is Peter stepping fully into his own identity, not as Tony's protege, not as the next Iron Man, but as himself. He doesn't need a mentor in the same way he once did, but he might need something adjacent, not a teacher, a peer, someone who operates at street level, who has been doing this longer, who can offer context without offering control. Matt Murdock is the obvious candidate, we've discussed him at length. But there's another possibility that the comics suggest: Luke Cage, a man who has been protecting Harlem for years with no institutional backing, no special technology, and a set of abilities that are formidable but not overwhelming. A man who understands, at a granular level, what it means to be a superhero in the specific communities of New York rather than the abstract world that the Avengers tend to protect. A Luke Cage who meets Spider-Man, doesn't know his name, and offers the kind of guidance that comes not from experience above him, but from experience beside him, that would be something different from anything Peter has had before. Not a father figure, not a boss, just someone who's been doing the work and knows the shape of it. One more element of the new supporting cast that I want to name explicitly, because I think it's easy to overlook. New York City, in Brand New Day, is itself a character. The people in Peter's neighborhood who don't know his name but know the shape of Spider-Man's silhouette on the rooftop. The bodega owner who has kept the security footage of Spider-Man catching a shoplifter and refuses to delete it. The elderly woman on the third floor who leaves a thermos of coffee on her windowsill on cold nights because she noticed, once, that the neighborhood's Spider-Man pauses on that fire escape. These are not plot characters. They don't have names necessarily, but they are the texture of Peter's new life, the evidence that, even without anyone knowing who he is known. He is seen. Not as Peter Parker, but as something. And sometimes, when you've lost everything, being seen as something is enough to keep going. We're getting close to the end now. The theories have been told. The possibilities have been laid out. We've wandered through the mechanics of the spell, through MJ and Ned, and the villains, and the comics, and the other Spider-Men, and we've arrived somewhere quieter. I want to spend this section, the last real section, before the wind down, on something that isn't strictly a theory. It's more of a question, a philosophical one, which I think is appropriate for this time of night or morning, or whatever hour this is finding you. The question is, what does it mean to be good when no one is watching? Most heroism, as a cultural concept, requires a witness, not because heroes are motivated by attention, many aren't, but because heroism is defined relationally. A hero is a hero because people are in need and the hero shows up. The relationship between the person doing the deed and the people who benefit from it is central to what makes the deed heroic rather than merely useful. Peter Parker has always been within that framework. He has often had people who knew what he was doing and why. May knew, Ned knew, Tony knew, the Avengers knew in broad strokes. There was always a network, thin sometimes, fraying sometimes, but present, of people who understood that the person in the suit was also a person and that the person mattered. Brand New Day removes that network entirely. Peter now acts in a city that cannot contextualize him. When he catches someone, the person he catches doesn't know they were saved by a person. They know they were saved by Spider-Man, a figure with no human identity attached to it. When he stops a crime, the people who are protected experience only the outcome, not the cost. They have no idea what it takes, and he will never tell them. There is a case to be made, and I think it's a genuine case, not a consoling fiction, that this is the purest form of heroism. Philosophy has spent a lot of time on the question of why people help each other. Specifically on the question of whether a good act can really be good if the person doing it gets something out of it. Recognition, gratitude, the warm feeling of having been useful. The uncomfortable implication being that maybe most of what we call altruism is quietly self-serving, in some way we don't always want to acknowledge. Peter Parker in Brand New Day sidesteps all of that entirely. He helps people and gets nothing back. Not gratitude, they don't know who to thank. Not respect, they know Spider-Man, not the person. Not love, the people who loved him don't remember why. He acts purely because the act is right, and for no other reason that the structure of his current life will support. That is the philosophical ideal of altruism. Not performed, not strategic, not even reciprocal, just the act and the choice to keep making it. Aunt May told Peter, with her last breath, that with great power comes great responsibility. She was talking about a principle she had lived by, the idea that having capacity creates obligation, that what you can do is inseparable from what you should do. In Brand New Day, that principle is all Peter has left. Not the relationships it was delivered in the context of, not the woman who said it, just the words themselves and the decision to keep letting them be true. I want to be honest about something here, because I think the consoling version of this argument sells Peter's situation short. It is lonely, profoundly, specifically lonely, in a way that goes beyond the ordinary loneliness of solitude. It is the loneliness of invisibility, of doing something that matters, continuously, and having no one to reflect that matter back. It is the loneliness of knowing that the thing you carry cannot be shared, not because you're keeping a secret, but because there is no one in your life who knows enough of your story to receive it. That loneliness is not good. It is not, in itself, admirable. Peter Parker is not better for being isolated. He is better despite it, and the despite matters. The despite is the story. The interesting theory, the one that, to me, captures what Brand New Day is actually about, is not that Peter thrives alone. It's that he keeps going anyway. That he wakes up on a Tuesday in a modest apartment and puts on the suit and goes out and does the work and comes home and does it again. Not because it feels meaningful necessarily, not because it's rewarding, but because stopping would mean that all of it, May, MJ, Ned, Tony, every sacrifice that got him to this point was for nothing. And Peter Parker does not accept things being for nothing. That is his defining quality, not the powers, not the intelligence, not even the conscience, but the refusal to let the sacrifice go to waste. But here's the honest counter-argument to the purity argument, and it's one the story will have to reckon with. Human beings are not designed for complete isolation. The psychological literature on solitary living is fairly clear. Loneliness, of the magnitude Peter is experiencing, has real measurable effects on cognition, emotional regulation, and long-term well-being. The altruism doesn't inoculate you against the biology. At some point, Peter will need connection. Not because he's weak, the opposite, actually. Because he has the self-awareness to recognize that continuing to function at the level his choices require demands some kind of human sustenance. He needs someone to know him, not all of him. Not the Spider-Man, just some part of the person underneath. Theory, the arc of Spider-Man 4 is not Peter achieving heroism through solitude. It's Peter realizing that the solitude is not a virtue in itself, that protecting people means nothing if the person doing the protecting is quietly eroding. That, with great power comes great responsibility, includes the responsibility to keep yourself intact enough to keep using the power. The film's emotional resolution, if it earns one, is a door opening. One connection. One person who knows something real about Peter Parker. Perhaps not everything, but something. A beginning, not a recovery, not a fairy tale. Just a door, and the willingness to open it. Every Spider-Man story follows the same arc, roughly. Loss, persistence, a new beginning that arrives smaller and more personal than the one that preceded it. Tobey's Peter never lost Gwen and found Mary Jane. Andrew's Peter lost Gwen and learned to catch what fell. Our Peter lost everyone, and the theory goes, we'll find someone new. Not replacement, not substitution, not a consolation prize for all the things that were taken. Just the next thing, the Brand New Day. Spider-Man is the character who does not give up. Not because he's invincible, he is by superhero standards quite vincible, but because the alternative to not giving up is giving up, and that's just not in his grammar. He was given power he didn't ask for, and responsibility he didn't choose, and he said yes to both of them. And he keeps saying yes every Tuesday in every universe. And one day, in a film we haven't seen yet, in a story that hasn't been told, someone will call his name. Not Spider-Man, his name. The name a spell tried to erase from the world. And it will sound, in that moment, like being found. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. Stranger's spell, and the questions of what it did and didn't erase. The coffee shop scene, and all the ways MJ might, or might never, find her way back to something she can't name. Ned and his sling ring, and the two very different futures that might be waiting for him. Matt Murdock, who catches bricks and recognizes things his memory has been told to forget. McGargan, patiently unresolved in a post-credits scene that has been waiting 7 years for its moment. Norman Osborn, and the legacy he left in a universe he only visited briefly. The symbiote on the bar, Peter's Tuesday. All of it just theories in the end. Possibilities, the kind of thinking you do about stories you love when you want to stay a little longer inside them. The Brand New Day is, above everything else, a concept about openness. It is not a story that announces what comes next. It is a story that says, the old chapter is finished. The new one hasn't been written yet. And for a while, that blank page is the point. Peter Parker in his homemade suit, swinging through a snowy city, is not a figure who has been defeated. He is a figure who has been reset. The resources are stripped back to zero, but so is the weight. The connections are gone, but so is the danger to the people he loved. He's been reduced to the essential himself, and the choice, and the city, and that is not nothing. That is, in a very real sense, enough. The theories that feel most true to me, and I want to be clear that these are personal preferences, not predictions, are the ones that take the grief seriously without letting it define everything. The MJ theory that suggests she might feel something without knowing what. The Ned theory that holds two possibilities without committing to either one. The Murdoch theory that finds Peter again, not through magic, but through the city they share. The symbiote theory that reads the alien fragment as a metaphor for the things we reach for in our loneliness and have to choose to let go of. These are the theories that feel, to me, like the shape of good Spider-Man storytelling. Personal, grounded in specificity, earning whatever emotional payoff they reach for. Wherever you are right now, you're probably quite comfortable. The screen is dim, or the audio is softened to something that sits at the edge of your attention, or you've closed your eyes and you're just letting the words come in slowly and settle where they land. That's exactly where I'd like to leave you, with an image rather than an argument, not a theory, just a picture. Peter Parker, late at night, perched on a fire escape above a New York street. Below him, the city is doing what the city always does, moving and humming and carrying its millions of people through their millions of lives. He's been out for a few hours. It was quiet tonight. A mugging he stopped 2 blocks east. A burst pipe that was flooding a ground floor flat until he directed the super to the shut-off valve. Nothing cinematic, just the ordinary work of keeping the neighbourhood intact. He sits for a while before going home, not because he's watching for danger, just because this is the part of the night where the city sounds like itself. Not threatening, not demanding, just present. A sound he knows well by now. On the 3rd floor across the street, a windowsill, and on it, a thermos. He pauses. He doesn't know who put it there. He doesn't know how many nights they've been watching. He just knows it's warm, and it's there, and the night is cold, and somewhere in this vast, forgetful city, someone decided to leave something out for him. He takes it. He sits on the fire escape in the dark. He's not alone. He just doesn't know it yet. Sleep well.